From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Biden speaks at an NAACP event as he continues a week of outreach to black voters, culminating in an address this weekend at Morehouse College, where they're bracing for the possibility of protests.
We'll have more on his efforts to court key demographics at home with Democratic Representative Haley Stevens of Michigan. Plus, we'll be joined this hour by Angela Stent of the Brookings Institution for a look abroad at the war in Ukraine.
And Senate Judiciary Chair Dick Durbin calls on Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito to recuse himself from cases involving the 2020 election and January 6th, as a report of a Stop the Steal symbol at Alito's home puts a new spotlight on the court's ethics. And a spotlight, Joe, on the fact that we still, in the middle of the 2024 election cycle, are debating legal matters related back to the 2020 election cycle. This is an ongoing narrative, but of course we're in a new campaign. It's a new race entirely, just the same candidates.
Well, that is true. Some new problems, you could argue, however, for Joe Biden, who's watching erosion. And we talk about this in our own Bloomberg swing state poll. We saw confirming numbers in the Siena College poll earlier this week. NBC News has had similar polling showing deterioration among young people, deterioration among black voters, and the president has been working overtime as a campaigner-in-chief in this case to try to win them back. It's been a bit of a tour this week, Kaylee, including a stop today at the African American Museum here in Washington. Here's Joe Biden.
Black history is American history. It's American. You know, it's a really important thing to continue to. We have a whole group of people out there trying to rewrite history, trying to erase history.
We're joined now by Bloomberg's Enda Curran for more. So, Enda, as we consider the issues that the president is having with a number of key constituencies, demographics that he's going to need to reassemble in a coalition for him if he wants a second term, there are some common denominators here in terms of issues, including economic issues and whether or not people feel like they have advanced during his administration.
So I think on the economy, former President Trump is given the advantage consistently in the opinion polls. Our colleagues have run an analysis on the economic performance of both. And under that, you see President Biden coming out in terms of jobs creation and economic growth, but former President Trump's administration winning out in terms of inflation and income. Now, a lot of that is complicated by the pandemic. A lot of it is due to the stimulus that both administrations spent during that period. And, of course, there's a blame game between both political camps. But nonetheless, where we are right now, Trump's side has the edge, certainly among common perception among voters. Inflation this week, we saw the numbers for President Biden starting to head again in the right direction, but still hitting harder where it hurts, like housing costs and medical insurance and car costs. Jobs growth is holding up, however, for President Biden. So the economic story is front and central, and it hasn't that story hasn't yet been fully completed. I think we'll know more over the months ahead.
Remarkable piece of writing on the terminal today by our economics team. The cumulative increase in consumer prices during Biden's term likely will end up being higher than any other president in the past 40 years. This is a White House and a campaign looking for green shoots, but that's a stubborn statistic.
It's a dreadful statistic for any political administration around the world. It is, of course, a result of the pandemic. Again, this is where you get into the complications of the pandemic, right? What caused what, supply chains, stimulus and everything else. But we are where we are. As I mentioned a moment ago, inflation is starting to head